afternoon to all of you. I will talk about the bilateral investment treaties. I know that in the Executive Committee, the resolution presented by Ecuador was not welcome. It was not well received. There are countries that they believe this is a topic or an issue that should not be dealt with in this forum. I believe that, yes, indeed, it should be dealt with. We in Ecuador, we believe that these subjects must be talked about in these forums because bilateral investment treaties initially were proposed to promote and protect reciprocal investments and to favor the growth of lesser developed countries. Nevertheless, these treaties have led to results contrary to what was expected. And international arbitration courts do not always guarantee collective interests, but rather guarantee the interests of the companies, of the corporations. That is easy to say, of course. You can say that to me, but I will tell you in turn that I will prove what I have just said. According to the CIADI, and it's a statistics published in the report 72248 on the burden of the cases in the court, talking about 2013, 1972, and 2012, the bilateral investment treaties were invoked to establish that this court should be the arbitration center for 73%. We're talking about the BITs. Only 20% of the cases that were filed of the disputes, the contract was invoked between the state party and the investor. That is, the BITs were the instruments that acted as the guideline to establish the jurisdiction. And the trend is to invoke bilateral investment treaties. By the year 2011, the percentages went up to 77% of the cases, and only 13% of the cases were invoked the contract between the parties. That means that the decisions by the arbitrators, to be very broad about interpreting this, try to avoid the decision of the legal courts of the states parties, and that the states party and their judiciary system do not count. Another information that is important, while 85% of the cases that were filed were against the states of Latin America and the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Until the year 2012, 72% of the arbiters appointed with these courts were citizens of Western Europe and North America. This is not a coincidence. It's not casual. Most of the countries are being judged by the minority of the world. As well known by the world, since its creation, the president of the World Bank has always been a U.S. citizen. And this is the officer who exercises ex officio the chairmanship of the CID, of this court. And he has the power to designate the arbitrators when the parties do not designate them or do not agree on a third arbitrator, and also to designate the three members of cancellation. This system of arbitration between states and investors takes away the power of states to restructure their debts, as in the case of Ablatat versus Argentina. The tax measures, for example, Occidental of Ecuador against Ecuador, public health, as in the case of Philip Morris against Australia and Philip Morris against Uruguay, and the environment, for Renko against Peru and Mitchell-Clark against Mexico. The excesses of public services, as in the lawsuits of Enron against Argentina, Swiss against Argentina, and the sovereignty of natural resources, as in the cases of Meeting against Indonesia, Perenco against Ecuador, and Burlington against Ecuador. The statistics about the rulings of the arbitration courts of CID indicate that only 28% of the judgments were declared were without appeal, whereas in 48% of the cases they were declared for appeals of the companies against states. This trend is increasingly favorable for only the companies. In only 2012, the decisions for the benefit of states declined to only 11%, whereas the judgments for the benefit of company went up to 63%. As for the case of Occidental against Ecuador, we're talking about $1.7 billion that the company is claiming because of expropriation. That is a similar amount to the state budget for health spending. The indicates that failure to comply with the contract by the company to transfer the rights of this oil block to a third legal party without authorization of the Ecuadorian state, and recognizes that the contract determines this as a cause of expiry of the contract, according to the arbitration court. But the same judgment indicates that the declaration of cancellation of the contract is an excessive measure because the Occidental company acted without knowledge, not out of bad faith, as indicated President Rafael Correa. Can you imagine for one single moment that when you have a legal violation of an Ecuadorian company in the United States, it will argue that it did fail to comply with the contract, but it did so because it did not know the law. And what U.S. court will listen to this silly claim by an Ecuadorian company? When will we decide that foreign institutions will decide what happens in our country? What happens in Occidental and Oxy? These information indicates that it's necessary to develop mechanisms to promote investments in international arbitration courts that will take into account the rights of people and nature above and beyond the interest of corporations, and that applies international law and the just distribution of profits and the balanced composition and membership of arbitration courts. This is a responsibility that cannot be avoided by our parliamentarians who represent their people. We propose to the Asia-Pacific Parliamentary Forum to promote mechanisms to negotiate fair contracts, equitable contracts, and direct contracts between states and investors based on international law without detriment to the investors. They can use the sovereign jurisdiction of the state to promote public policies to promote the development of their respective nations. It is necessary that this forum promote compliance with resolution of the Human Rights Council of the United Nations in the 26th session with respect to the drafting of a legally binding instrument to regulate in terms of human rights the activities of transnational companies and other companies. Finally, we propose that this forum include a resolution to reject the abuses of legal appeals and the abuses of extrajudicial mechanisms and the malicious campaigns and the instruments of geopolitical pressures used by large transnational corporations in their states, such as in the case of Chevron and Occidental